episode on it with Erin from Health Nut News, who's been tracking the story, and she came up with so much of it. And these are real people who've dedicated themselves, men and women, to holistic health, and they're doctors and nurses, and there's a systematic death list going on of these people, especially people. Some of them actually had trouble with the FDA because they were anti the excessive vaccine, or they had done vaccine examinations. They'd done their own research. They'd come out with papers on it. But a lot of them are associated with this GCMAF cancer research. And certainly we're going to get into this very deeply in the episode. But just to touch upon it briefly here, this is a very serious story. In the alternative media, which is breaking it, and the corporate media is still leaving that alone, and there are some very hardcore details about this story. For example, Merck, which is a major drug company, they got taken to court, and there were some court papers that were released that showed that, in fact, they had targeted doctors, not for termination. They didn't hire hit teams, but they had targeted them for ruining their reputation so they could get certain drugs passed through the FDA. And they needed those who were opposing them to be taken down somehow. And some of the language in that court case from the Merck employees is shocking. And reading that, I highly recommend people do. And certainly, we'll cover a lot of that also in the episode. But one of the things that I found in there was that they said, and I'm paraphrasing, but we're going to track them down and take them down. So that was from a case where you had doctors coming on the record opposing their new drug, which they found dangerous, but which Merck wanted to sell anyway. So it's very important to understand that on some level this type of thinking exists. So now we extrapolate that out and we go look at the holistic MD situation. Why are so many holistic MDs dying? And this is an incredible, I think that we're looking at something like 20 cases now in the period of about a year. So, it's an incredible pattern, and it continues. Something recently happened as recently as 2 weeks ago.
And it's weird deaths, right? It's
One of them I found very strange, very, very strange. There was a gentleman who had gone and checked into a hotel room, and they said, well, it's not quite ready yet. And he said, well, that's okay, I'll go to the store. And so he goes to the store, he buys a bottle of wine and some hummus. On his way back, decides that his life isn't worth living, blows his brains out, jumps in the river, and leaves the gun by the riverbed. So, these are the types of cases that just don't add up. A lot of the cases look funny, and, it's a very sensitive topic because people have lost important people in their lives. But I think it's the kind of thing that we need to look at and look at deeply. So this is a very serious story coming up in alternative media. Now, simultaneously with it, you see a third force junk conspiracy story coming up right beside it. And the third force story, in my opinion anyway, is this flat earth stuff that we see everywhere. And oddly enough, it's so absurd. It is these far-flung theories that we haven't been given the truth and that Earth is a flat plane and all this kind of stuff. But oddly enough, it's taken up a lot of the oxygen of this story that's coming out around the holistic MDs. I see those. I'll watch press patterns on a regular basis. I sort of take an eye into what's rising, what stories are coming out, and so on. And one of the things I noticed was that Flat Earth was showing up everywhere that story was showing up. Almost like, can we mix these two in the public's mind so that they don't understand the importance and the severity of the original story by giving them this junk conspiracy story, which
they try to almost discredit it by putting something really stupid next to it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it becomes the stuff of like a tabloid.
Yeah, like nobody believes in what's in a tabloid because it's just goofy. Yeah. So if it's in there, like even if it's real, they do have some good stuff in there, but it's not.
Sarah's magic word is goofy.
Well,
I call it junk conspiracy. Say it's goofy.
Well, there's a pretty serious. This was back in the Bush administration, but I was just watching some stuff about I just did a really great interview with Gwen Shotwell, which is the president of SpaceX, and I was watching some stuff about military in space, because so much of the military now is, NASA has lost a lot of the funding, as we all know, and the military gets a lot more of the funding, and the military budget for space is a lot larger than NASA's budget, and NASA's now focused on science more hardcore, like looking at what the plan, just more science. And although military is based on science, anything in space is science, but more exploratory science versus military science. And there was back in the Bush administration in the mid-2000s, there was around the world, there was a lot of stories with the United States militarizing the space, and they didn't like it because the United States is taking over the outer, the orbits and stuff from the moon to the Earth, and we're taking over the military areas, and we're turning in. There's bases up there, and that's what we're doing, and that's the plan, and the rest of the media around the world was talking about it, and they didn't like it, and there was debates and all these things. But in the United States, there was nothing. The wire service, if you do a search on militarizing space, there was one small article in a small, rural town in Utah that talked about it. But in other countries, it was all over the place. So it's a good example of how the United States, even, our country just doesn't cover the media like other countries do. I know every country has their own issues, right? We're 49th in Freedom of the Press Index, United States is, so that shows that we've fallen quite a bit. But other countries have their issues too. But from that perspective, it showed that the rest of the world wanted to talk about it, and we weren't allowed to. Mm-hmm. It was a really clear indication that there was something weird going on there. And I think because of the internet, people are starting to be aware that, hey, wait a minute, there's news stories going on outside our sphere, and we don't get to hear about it. And that's an awakening, too.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what's fascinating about that is there's two really big things you brought up there, because the weaponization of space is one of those areas that, you have to pay attention to it sooner or later, because it's the stuff of World War III, if you think about it. And we go back into the 1980s and we see Reagan's Star Wars program, which was the SDI technology. And the idea was that they were going to set up these massive kind of lasers out there in space that would shoot down missiles coming in that were nuclear. And they put a lot of money and time into this idea. And supposedly it got shelved as part of the deal basically we made with Russia, and because the Soviet Union's economy was crashing, and eventually the Soviet Union just went out. But what happened to the technology is a great question.
Well, of course. We're not going to throw away. Let's just throw it away.
And we've done a lot of shows on the secret space program. I hosted a conference last fall, Secret Space Program Conference in Texas. And there is a great deal of evidence from Gary McKinnon, who was a NASA hacker, that we have an entire fleet of off-world officers who are out there exploring much more deeply, setting up bases and doing a lot, and that it's actually funded by the public. And that the official NASA program, as we've talked about before, is shredded down to pre-moon landing levels. We're talking about really basically nothing for a budget. But this is the program that has built up all this infrastructure. Now all the privatization, you spoke with SpaceX, and I can think of a few others, like Bigelow Aerospace, for example. And they're tight with the government, and they get those contracts, and they go up there, and they're going to be able to take advantage of this whole thing. And yet, it was all set up by public money. So this is something that we need to go after, and it is important to the issues on the ground. And somebody might say, well, they're, secret space program, how is that going to impact my daily life? Well, it does, because it's actually an economic issue in the grand scheme of things. Because what kind of opportunities are available out there in space, from asteroid mining to space tourism? They're building a whole economy up there, but they're also weaponizing it. And, we have a number of stories about data being stored in space now. And if it's stored close enough to satellites, then we don't have the ability to subpoena it.
Well, it's a whole secret area, and there's just so much going on. We all know that. And one of the things that SpaceX said, I mean, we need people to research it and go up there, right? We need this because one of the things that we talked about is that, you know, going and living on other planets is probably a good thing. And I read something Elon Musk said about just the human species needs an insurance policy, you know, to be able to have another place to live. And when you think about that, it's almost a certainty with how many people have nuclear weapons. It's almost a certainty that it is a certainty at some point in time that there will be a nuclear bomb exploding somewhere, right? Sure. And the more people that have it, it's just a mathematical equation of the more people that have it, the more hands that have it, and the longer time, you know, time versus people eventually equals a certainty. And that's a scary part, because can we mature enough to keep ourselves alive? You know, can we mature enough as a species to, and so us getting out of the earth and trying to figure out, can we go elsewhere? But part of my thinking is, you know, we need this, and they know we need it, but the problem is it's not transparent. You know, the SpaceX stuff, that's great. That's more transparent. They're trying to do more, you know, the basic creating like an airline flight, you know, like a shuttle flight. They're just trying to create, they want to be the fleet of people and commercial progress going up in space. They want to create that vehicle, like being an airline.
Sure.
And
just corporate opportunities for them.
They want to create. Yeah, they want to create the infrastructure, right, so that people can travel and stuff. But if there is all those resources out there, which that's another reason they want to get people out there. If there's all those resources out there and everything else, and then there's all this military opportunity, it's just so obvious that we're going to take advantage of it, right? And that's what's going on. The problem is it's being hidden from the people. You know, the commercialization part isn't, but the whole militarization part is. And at what point is the military base of that really an extension of who we are? And the military starts to take over our whole life and all of our resources, and we become a military type, you know, a society, but it's all hidden from us. Mm-hmm. It's just there's a major problem with that.
Yeah. We're doing basically somewhere close to $800 billion a year on our military.
Oh, that's nothing.
That's not even with the black budget money.
I know.
But I will say this. There are other aspects to space that are going to be problematic because, as you know, we discuss on my show quite a bit, there's the incidence of UFOs in space, whatever you want to attribute them to. That's the kind of stuff that's out there. And if you have other countries out there, like we know China and India have their own programs to go to the moon, they're launching satellites. My goodness, North Korea launched a satellite, if you can imagine that, into outer space. Horrible. To think of them out there.
Well, yeah, they want to get their satellites out there.
But here's an interesting thing. You think about countries like that. They're not within the realm of UFO secrecy, which is an actual official American policy. So what happens when they start showing this stuff that's really out there? It's going to be problematic, and I think that's one of the reasons why we have this great jump. But certainly, as far as secrecy goes, we're number one, you know, and that's a problem. The idea, though, if we're going to start to look at what's happening in outer space, especially in what's sort of immediate here in our solar system, you know, we're going to have to grow as a culture about what's out there. And, you know, we have these whole programs dedicated to reverse engineering craft. And these are programs that we've had whistleblowers for years about them. What does it represent? What does the UFO phenomenon represent in this regard? You need transparency in journalism and the ability to take it on as a subject. And the culture also, I think at this point, you know, we're seeing signs in the culture, everything from Pepsi doing this Black Knight satellite commercial. And the Black Knight satellite is from UFO lore. It's actually from Donald Kehoe, who was an Air Force major back in the 50s. And he studied a number of the pictures that we had there at the time from NASA in outer space. And there's something that came up that looked very much like a Black Knight. And they kept seeing it, and nobody knew what it was. So it's a real kind of cornerstone of UFO lore. And So Pepsi used it as the foundation for their commercial, and they created this incredible 10-minute Hollywood rollout of this thing. And you think about it, what were they doing? What did they even spend that money on?
Well, it's crazy because they tied it to Tesla, because Tesla actually in 1899 identified this Black Knight satellite and was